Canada's waking up from a pleasant dream. For years, the country was seen as a model of stability, a place where you could study, work, buy a home, and build a safe, comfortable life. But by 2025, that image has shattered. Canadians are beginning to realize that reality no longer matches the story they once believed. Housing prices have exploded, living costs now outpace income, hospitals are overwhelmed, traffic is gridlocked, wages fail to keep up with inflation, and the population is growing faster than at any point in modern history. Nowhere is this shift more visible than in the housing market. In Toronto, rental prices have hit record highs. According to Statistics Canada's 2025 rental market report, the average asking rent for a two-bedroom apartment is now around 2,690 Canadian dollars per month. In Vancouver, the country's most expensive city, that figure climbs even higher, reaching roughly 3,170. And it's not just the major cities feeling the pressure. CBC News reports that across many urban centers in Canada, rental costs have surged far beyond wage growth, leaving anyone earning minimum wage nearly unable to afford even a one-bedroom unit without spending more than 30 to 40% of their income, a level that exceeds the housing affordability threshold defined by CMHC. The dream of homeownership is even further out of reach. According to the National Bank of Canada, qualifying for a mortgage in Toronto or Vancouver now requires an income 2 to 3 times higher than the average household income. Even high earners are being pushed out of the market. Some people are now living in their cars or crammed into shared motels just to get by a sign that things may be worse than they have ever been. But housing is only the visible tip of the iceberg, because behind these numbers lies something much bigger, a force that is pushing every system in Canada to its limit. And it all begins with an unprecedented surge in population. So what exactly happened? Back in 2015, Justin Trudeau came into power on a wave of optimism, a message of hope, a belief in the future, and an image so young and open that the media often compared him to Barack Obama. On his very first day as Prime Minister, he walked into a Montreal subway station and took selfies with commuters. The clip went viral. The mood was genuinely upbeat. Canadians felt they were entering a new era. In fact, Trudeau's approval rating once hit around 65%, one of the highest ever recorded for a first-term prime minister. But the situation has grown far more severe than anyone expected. And to understand why Trudeau's approval ratings collapsed, we need to look at the 3 crises tightening their grip on the country. Something few ever imagined could happen in a nation built by immigrants themselves. In the mid-19th century, most of Canada's population lived only along the east, clustered around the St. Lawrence River and the Great Lakes. The west and the north were still vast, sparsely inhabited frontiers. To expand its territory and grow its economy, Canada began launching large-scale settlement programs. The federal government, together with private companies such as the Canadian Pacific Railway, ran major promotional campaigns across Britain, Scandinavia, Germany, and Ukraine, portraying Western Canada as a land of opportunity. Immigrants poured in through ports like Halifax and Quebec City, and they were carefully selected, favoring experienced farmers who could build communities from the ground up. This strategy reshaped Canada's population map. Between 1867 and 1921, the country grew from roughly 3.4 million to nearly 9 million people, with new towns rising along the southern border. But what is less often acknowledged is that immigration policy at the time was explicitly discriminatory. Canada prioritized white European settlers from Northern and Western Europe while strictly limiting groups deemed racially unsuitable. After World War II, these racial restrictions came under heavy scrutiny. From the late 1940s through the 1960s, Canada gradually dismantled discriminatory provisions. And by 1967, a new point-based system, the foundation of modern Canadian immigration, was officially introduced. Canada began evaluating immigrants based on factors such as age, education, job skills, and language ability. The philosophy was simple: select the most capable individuals who could contribute immediately to the economy. It was a turning point, and the system remains in place today, making Canada the longest-running skills-based immigration country in the OECD. But even in its early years, an unexpected problem emerged. The share of family-sponsored immigrants grew much faster than projected. In 1971, economic immigrants made up 73% of arrivals, while family-class immigrants accounted for just 21%. A decade later, the balance had flipped. Policymakers worried that the family category would strain social services and contribute less economically, prompting the government to tighten admission criteria to restore balance. By the mid-1990s, Canada had sharply reduced the family class share from over 70% to only about 36%. This was the result of an immigration system designed to be flexible and centered on federal executive power, allowing the government to quickly recalibrate in response to migration flows deemed misaligned with national objectives. The result was that by the early 21st century, Canada's immigration system was held up as a global gold standard, even praised by figures known for their hardline views on immigration, including Donald Trump.
Have a merit-based immigration system.
But what truly made this model exceptional wasn't just its design, it was the level of public consensus behind it. For years, immigration barely stirred political conflict. In 2018, 2/3 of Canadians believed immigration was beneficial to the country, the highest level of support in the entire OECD. However, that optimism did not last. In just a few short years, public sentiment has swung with astonishing speed. From a country that championed immigration, Canada is steadily becoming a place where a majority now worries about the current pace, especially as they face soaring housing costs and living expenses spinning out of control. During Justin Trudeau's first 4 years in office, Canada's population grew at the fastest rate in modern history, largely driven by immigration. The pandemic briefly slowed that momentum, but the pause only made underlying problems impossible to ignore. The labor shortage was the clearest example. Construction, restaurants, transportation, healthcare, nearly every sector was short of workers. Businesses complained they simply couldn't find people with the necessary skills. In that context, Immigration Minister Sean Fraser, like many in the role before him, saw immigration as the most flexible tool to patch the gaps in the economy: labor shortages, weak productivity, and stagnating growth. On top of that, Canada faced an even more serious challenge: an aging population. Canada is aging faster than almost any other Western nation. In 1971, the ratio of seniors to working-age Canadians was 1:7. By 2012, it had fallen to 4:1. And by 2036, projections show a dramatic shift. For every 2 retirees, there will be only 2 workers left to support them. While the number of people over 75 is expected to double in the next 2 decades, the labor force is shrinking. It's a formula that guarantees rising healthcare costs, ballooning pension budgets, and stagnating growth unless Canada replenishes its population from the outside. This was the backdrop for an immigration strategy unlike anything before it, more ambitious, more aggressive, and also more controversial than any program Canada had ever launched. By 2022, Canada entered a period of population growth without precedent. Even after the pandemic, the country recorded the fastest population increase in its modern history, and instead of easing off, the Trudeau government accelerated further. Ottawa unveiled a series of new targets: 465,000 permanent residents in 2023, 485,000 in 2024, and 500,000 in 2025. 60% of newcomers would be economic immigrants, skilled, educated, experienced workers ready to join the labor market immediately. The government focused especially on sectors with the most severe shortages. As a result, in 2023, Canada became the fastest growing population in the entire OECD, a growth rate usually seen in countries going through demographic booms, not in a mature, stable economy like Canada. And this is where all the tensions began to converge when immigration growth far outpaced the speed at which housing, infrastructure, and public systems could expand. In 2022, only about 27% of Canadians believed the country was accepting too many immigrants. By 2023, that number had surged to 51%, and in 2024, it rose again to 58%. The breaking point came in the summer of 2024, when immigration-related protests appeared for the first time in major cities across the country.
Housing, there's nowhere for them to go. So what are you bringing them here for?
The government repeatedly emphasized that Canada's economy was growing, and statistically, that was true. But much of this growth was simply the result of a rapidly expanding population. Per capita growth was falling, and Canadians' real standard of living was slipping with it. Another key factor was the explosion of temporary residents, temporary foreign workers, international students, and other short-term permit holders. Their numbers surged in a very short time, sending demand for housing, healthcare, and education skyrocketing, and Canada simply could not keep up. Under mounting pressure, Trudeau was forced to reverse course. He announced that Canada would reduce the number of newcomers over the next few years to cool population growth, while acknowledging that 3 decades of underinvestment in housing, combined with construction bottlenecks and supply chain breakdowns, had left the country unable to meet demand. Most importantly, he admitted that his government's open-door immigration approach had intensified the housing crunch. And as home prices, rents, and living costs continue to rise far faster than incomes, the standard of living in Canada, once considered the country's greatest strength, is now visibly declining year after year. Canadians' perception of their own country has shifted dramatically. When asked whether Canada had become more unequal, only 19% in 2019 said it was highly unequal. Today, that number has climbed to 38%, nearly doubling in just a few years. The story around the cost of living is even more troubling. In 2019, 66% of Canadians felt their standard of living was getting worse. By 2024, that figure had surged to 84%. These are no longer abstract numbers in economic reports. They reflect how people feel about their own day-to-day lives. And the alarming part is that what we're seeing is only the surface. Canada is changing not in the way people once hoped, but in ways that leave many asking a difficult question. What happened to one of the most livable countries in the world?